The Intamin Blitz is one of the most popular, well-rounded, and beloved roller coaster models to exist. They're popular with the general public and enthusiasts alike, with the latter often praising these rides for their launches, airtime, inversions, and overall intensity. But while a lot of blitzes like Velocicoaster, Maverick, Pantheon, and Terran are often the topic of discussion in the coaster community, there's one truly elite ride of this model that I feel doesn't get enough attention, and that ride is Taiga. Even though Tyga is not some obscure coaster in the middle of nowhere, and I feel like it's reasonably well known, this ride is very hard to get to if you're an enthusiast, and I think the main reason why it's not talked about that much is that it simply hasn't been ridden by that many people. It's located at Linnanmäki in Helsinki, Finland, and aside from Junker and maybe a few others, is really the only great coaster in the entire country. A lot of enthusiasts who take trips to Scandinavia stick to Sweden and Denmark, which is reasonable since you can only get to Finland by flying or taking a ferry. But in October of 2021, I took a short flight from Stockholm to Helsinki to figure out how good this ride really is. And what I discovered is that Tyga is a perfect roller coaster. Tyga was added in 2019, occupying the plot of land that Vankapudis was previously in. That was a Premier Rides liquid coaster, the same model as Buzzsaw Falls at Silverdollar City, which was transformed into Powder Keg, and it had the same problems as the original. Both those rides were plagued with maintenance issues and hardly operated, even though Vankapudis was at the park for 16 years before Linnanmäki made the decision to remove it. In 2018, a year after the previous coaster closed for good, Linnanmäki announced Tyga, which was to be the tallest, fastest, and longest roller coaster in Finland. It still holds those records to this day. In case you haven't heard of this ride or don't know much about it, let's go over some stats, which are pretty similar to other blitzes by Intamin. Tyga is a terrain coaster, so with the elevation, its max height is 170 feet or 51 meters, but its drop height is just 105 feet or 32 meters. It reaches 66 miles per hour or 106 kilometers per hour, which I believe is actually on the bottom of the stall and not the second launch, but we'll get into all the specifics later. It's got just over 3,600 feet or 1,100 meters of track and features 4 inversions. From just taking a look at Tyga or watching a POV, nothing seems to be too special about it, but this is one of those coasters where a POV just doesn't do it justice at all. Tyga's layout, objectively, doesn't stack up to a lot of rides out there. But where this coaster shines, though, is not with the elements themselves, but how they are taken. Tyga's paced flawlessly, and each element shines in its own way, either by being intense, offering airtime, hangtime, or laterals. There's no real dead spots on this ride. I'd say that Tyga's biggest strength is definitely its pacing, and everything that it does comes from that. Airtime pops with more speed deliver better airtime, and all those turns that might not do much on any other ride are standout moments here because of the sheer pace it takes them with, making them places where I'd gray out. When Tyga needs to slow down, though, it does that wonderfully too, most notably offering amazing hang time on the 0G winder and stall. I touched on it a minute ago, but Tyga uses the terrain to its advantage. Over the course of the entire ride, it climbs up a hill and dives down it, offering up sudden changes in speed, which enhances the experience. It's compact too. Linnanmäki is located in the middle of a city and is really short on space. It doesn't even take 10 minutes to walk a lap around the entire park. And so as a result, Intamin had to be really creative when fitting this ride in. It crosses over itself multiple times, interacting with other coasters and flying over a maintenance road. Tyga isn't the longest ride due to the limited space, but it definitely feels long enough because of its relentless pacing. This whole coaster is just extremely well designed. For a small park like Linnanmäki, Tyga is actually pretty well themed as well. It's certainly nothing that you'd find at a Disney or Universal park, but you could definitely tell that some effort was put into theming. The ride's themed to an eagle. It's a pretty loose theme, but you can definitely feel the overall vibe of it. The Taiga in and of itself is a biome that's prevalent in northern Canada as well as other parts of the world where it's cold with trees, that sort of thing. The coaster's got its own custom soundtrack by Imascore, which is a really good one, just like pretty much everything Imascore's put out, and now it's stuck in my head. The queue's pretty simple, but it does have a nice aesthetic that fits with the coaster's theme. I've heard that this ride can get pretty long waits in the summer, but I visited on a Friday in October and there was hardly anyone at the park until the late afternoon. In total, I think I ended up getting 16 rides on it over the course of my one day at the park, which included some in the front, back, and middle. The trains are definitely comfortable, up there with some of my favorite coaster trains. They're similar to Velocicoaster at Islands of Adventure. I imagine it's also close to the other Intamin new-gen trains like Terran and Pantheon with the open seating and over-the-shoulder lap bars. I do prefer Tyga's trains to Velocicoasters though, due to the fact that they're slightly more elevated and the restraints are more fixed in one spot, so it hardly tightens during the ride. The lap bars and seats are very comfortable too, and along with T-bars and B&M clamshells, they're probably the best seat restraint combo on any extreme coaster. The train also looks really cool with the eagle head on the front and feathers on the side. It lights up at night, which is visually impressive, but we'll get into night rides later. In addition, the whole ride just looks amazing. The light blue track is beautiful, contrasted well by the black supports. There's a reason why Taiga is the coaster included in my outro and profile, and it's not only because it's amazing, it's because it's just gorgeous to look at. But obviously it's a lot better to ride, so let's talk about the layout. You roll out of the station and into the first launch. It's a rolling LSM launch with some real bite to it, definitely one of the better intimate launches I've experienced. It comes without warning and always managed to catch me off guard. I'm going to be comparing Tyga a lot to Velocicoaster during this, as well as maybe some other rides like iSpeed and Helix, since those are other similar coasters that I've ridden. I definitely prefer this first launch to the one on Velocicoaster. This one is more sudden and forceful in my opinion. After the launch, you immediately head into this unique inversion. It's officially classified as a zero-G winder and is one of the best moments on the ride. It's similar to a zero-G roll, but it's shaped differently with a sharp apex and twists 270 degrees, almost like a step-up underflip. This element gives outstanding hang time, definitely some of the best I've ever experienced. Due to it being the first element on the ride after the launch, your restraint hasn't come down yet if you're not stapled, which definitely enhances the feeling of hang time. Since you're twisting at the same time, there's also some mild lateral force, which is really a unique sensation when you're upside down. Following the zero-G winder, you dive down the hill, picking up speed and navigate a sharp right-hand turn which leads into a helix. The snap into this turn is whippy, throwing you sideways with some great lateral force. The following turn is very intense and really encapsulates the feeling of this coaster with its sustained positives, even if there's one moment later in the ride that does it a bit better in my opinion. This helix is one of a few moments on the ride where I would consistently gray out, and it keeps the momentum going well. At the end of the element, you rise back up and then snap out to the left. It's another whippy maneuver, although I don't remember it giving any airtime. I feel like the whip on Taiga is overshadowed by a lot of the other types of forces it pulls, but there's a ton of moments during the layout like this one where you're thrown from side to side. You then navigate another low turn and are whipped back the other way in an S-bend that leads to a 180-degree turn just before the second launch. This is one of the weaker sequences of elements on the ride. It's in no way bad, it's still a fun couple of maneuvers, but I just think that speaks to how flawless the rest of this layout is. The original turn is moderately intense, the snapback is pretty good, and then the part right before the second launch is, once again, decent. I wouldn't call this part a dead spot by any means, I just found that it didn't stack up to the rest of Taiga's elements. You then hit the second launch. This is another solid boost, very similar to the second launch on Velocicoaster. I don't really have a preference between the two. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't think this is where you reach your top speed, at least it feels like you're going faster in the valley after the stall. Much like other Blitz coasters, Taiga has a top hat after the second launch. You rise up, twisting to the right, and twist back down so that it essentially becomes a turnaround. The pull up into the top is intense, and you get a fantastic view of Helsinki at the top, which lasts for probably less than a second. The twist back down offers a nice combination of airtime and laterals, very similar to the drop off the top hat on iSpeed, and I imagine some other rides that traverse the same element the same way. This drop though is pretty small, so up front there's not a ton of force. It's much more accentuated in the back, which is one of the main reasons why I think this is a back row ride. Overall though, I usually like the back on coasters, so keep that in mind. Definitely make sure to try both the front and the back here. There are some elements that are better in the front, as well as some that are better in the back. Going back to the top hat, I definitely prefer Velocicoasters because even though there aren't any laterals on that one, it gives significantly stronger airtime. Taiga's top hat is really good too though. The next element is a massive zero-G stall. RCDB actually classifies this as a dive loop, which is completely wrong. This stall is shaped differently than other ones because it's mostly taken traveling downwards. This is another element that, along with the top hat, brings you further down the hill. It of course has great hang time and is my favorite stall I've experienced, beating out the ones on Velocicoaster, Wildfire, and the Linnanmäki bathrooms. What's unique about this one, and it kind of goes back to the shaping, is that you are traveling downwards for most of it, which means you end up picking up speed as you're upside down. It's a very cool feeling and one I've never really felt before. As a result, from the added speed, the transition out is very whippy. This is a fantastic element. Like I talked about, I think this is where you reach your top speed. Correct me in the comments if you know otherwise. You immediately fly into this sharp airtime hill, which gives a quick pop of ejector that's felt throughout the entire train. I've always felt that this is a similar style of element to the small bunny hill on Velocicoaster right before the Mosasaurus roll, but this one on Tyga is way better. Velocicoasters is pretty weak and drawn out, but this one gives the sharp ejector that's felt on lots of RMCs and other modern coasters. Immediately following is the ride's third inversion and Immelman. This is one of the elements that gets drastically better the more the ride warms up, which I'll be sure to talk about later. In the morning, it's definitely a good element, albeit rather traditional, but later in the day, the train speeds through this element super fast. The transition out isn't super whippy, but it's still fun. You navigate a left-hand turn and are immediately thrown into a twisted airtime hill. This element focuses more on pure whip than airtime, and I'd say it's the whippiest maneuver on the ride. The airtime's still great on this element too, though. I'd compare this twisted hill to one of the ones on Perrotin, but focusing more on whip and less on airtime. This is a great maneuver and leads into what's surprisingly my favorite part of the ride. After the hill, you rise up into this super tight helix that's probably the most intense element I've ever gone through, up there with Mance's pretzel loop. Here you're just barraged with positive Gs, which just get more intense the closer you get to the apex. Taiga's reported to pull 5 Gs, and I'd say this is absolutely where it hits that mark. It's a hardcore gray out moment every single time. The next part is this elevated section of little twists. This is by far the weakest moment on the ride, but to be honest, I really don't mind. It gives you a second or two to regain your vision after the crazy helix just before it, and acts more like a sort of mid-course brake run than anything else, while still banking from side to side. Just as you're able to see again though, Taiga whips you down and to the left in an abrupt moment that delivers both strong negative and lateral Gs. It completely caught me off guard the first time I went through it, and is an amazing moment. It's actually similar to a part of Helix which I had ridden a few weeks before I visited Finland. I'm talking about this unassuming little snap, although Taiga's gives more airtime and is on a larger scale. After the snap, you curve back down and rise up into this airtime hill, which snaps you once again to the left. This element again gives a great combination of whip and airtime. You then navigate another turn before going through a barrel roll, the final element before you hit the brakes. This inversion is extremely whippy, and like I mentioned earlier with the elevated seating position, it kind of feels like an inline twist with how you're rotating, a very unique sensation. All 4 of Taiga's inversions are outstanding, capped off by this one, which I believe to be the best of all of them. You then pop up, delivering some mild airtime, and hit the brakes, ending the ride. I've talked about the difference between day and night rides quite a bit on this channel, and I think the coaster whose contrast in that regard is greatest is Outlaw Run at Silver City. That goes from, quite honestly, the 3rd best ride in the park to an elite experience matched by few coasters in the world. It's really quite bizarre. That isn't the same situation as Tyga though. During the morning and afternoon, Tyga is phenomenal, but as day turns to night and the ride begins to run faster, this coaster's craziness is taken to another level. A lot of rides out there are known to warm up throughout the day, Outlaw Run being one of them, and I thought after my first rides that Tyga would not be one. It was running so fast already, how could it? But then throughout the day it just started getting faster and faster, and as darkness cast a shadow over the park, Tyga was at its best. The elements that packed strong forces during the day became easy gray out moments, and the parts that already were gray out moments became some of the most intense elements I've ever experienced. During the day, Tyga is unbelievable, but at night, it's perfect. I mentioned Velocicoaster, iSpeed, and Helix earlier, and I feel like Tyga takes the best parts of all 3 of those rides, ultimately outclassing each of them in their own right. It's got the style of Velocicoaster, a modern Intamin Blitz with 2 launches, airtime, and all of the same elements. Despite being built just 4 years ago, it's got the old school power and whippiness of iSpeed and what I would imagine Maverick to be like. It's got the setting and scale of Helix, another ride that uses the terrain incredibly well and features a diverse layout with lots of different sensations. More than any coaster I've ridden, I find myself appreciating the sheer variety of elements, sensations, and forces on Tyga. While a lot of modern coasters by Intamin, RMC, and other manufacturers are focused mostly on airtime, Tyga does a fantastic job mixing up its forces. It's got strong ejector airtime, sure, but this is definitely a more well-rounded ride than coasters like Velocicoaster or Untamed. First off, and probably Taiga's most prevalent sensation is pure positive Gs. Like I mentioned during the layout breakdown, there's plenty of moments on this ride that would be filler elements on any other coaster, but are genuinely some of the best parts here. Each valley in turn delivers a burst of intensity, with the most powerful moments being the Helix in the first half after the 0G winder, the Immelman, the Helix after the twisted hill, and the turn after the elevated section. Positive Gs are my favorite sensation on coasters, and Taiga's got a multitude of fantastic moments regarding that. In terms of airtime, Tyga is admittedly lacking a bit when it comes to quantity. The whole ride literally has 1 airtime hill, and that's this tiny little thing. When I compare it to other coasters I've ridden, like Untamed, which has 23 moments of airtime, there's no contest. But Taiga's also got some other moments with hints of floater and ejector sprinkled in. A lot of its elements provide 2 or more different sensations, like this twisted hill being both whippy and offering strong airtime. So in terms of airtime, I admittedly would have liked more moments in there, but it's quite frankly something that I never even thought about until now. I'm not there riding Taiga thinking, the coaster's good and all, but I wish there were a greater quantity of negative G-forces. No, I'm riding it, laughing my ass off, and having an amazing time. So when I go into all the specifics, analyzing the layout and the forces and comparing it to other coasters out there, that's really just the enthusiast in me trying to rationalize my thoughts or explain my opinion. And my opinion is that Tyga is an outstanding roller coaster. I got a little off topic there, but anyway, back to the breakdown. Hang time, it's a force that's not really common on coasters. Some models have it, like a lot of B&M wing coasters and rides by Gerstlauer. Hell, Gerstlauer even made a coaster called Hang Time. But in this new era of roller coasters, it's not a force that's especially prevalent in a lot of modern rides. I'd actually argue that the only consistent uses of it in the last 5 years are on JoJo rolls, found on coasters like Ride to Happiness and Copperhead Strike, and of course, zero-G stalls. So it's fantastic when a coaster like Taiga has two great moments of hang time, those being on the zero-G winder after the first launch, and once again on the stall. In my opinion, a great inversion has to do one of three things in terms of its forces, otherwise it'd be forgettable. It can either be super whippy, offer intense positive Gs, or be filled with hang time. The four inversions on Taiga check off all those boxes. The final barrel roll is a super whippy inversion, the Immelman packs the positives, and like I just mentioned, the zero-G winder and stall are filled with hang time. Taiga's got one of the best sets of inversions on any coaster I've ridden, and probably one of the best in general. Talking a little bit more about whippiness, I'm going to go into something that I've kind of touched on all throughout this video, laterals and whip on Taiga. Like I mentioned a minute ago, there's lots of elements on this ride that do more than one thing. Due to the nature of the coaster and its limitations with space, most of the time lateral force is one of those sensations. The transitions on Taiga are tight and concise. The way that they're taken reminds me a lot of Karnan at Hansa Park, and if you've been a fan of the channel for a while now, you know how much I love Karnan. Both those coasters have specific parts where you're just being thrown around laterally, and I can't get enough of that feeling. What about smoothness? There's some rides out there with great layouts that are ruined because they're rough beyond belief, looking at you SLCs. Being a new ride though, Taiga is very smooth. I've actually seen some complaints about how Taiga and some other modern Intamins have a bit of a shuffle to them, but that's not something I'd complain about at all. In fact, I never even noticed it unless I was looking for it, and that was only in specific parts. I might have just gone on a good day, I don't know, but at least for me, and it seems like most other people think the same, Taiga is glass smooth. But what sets Taiga apart in my eyes from every other coaster I've ridden is the pacing. More than any other ride I've experienced, Taiga is pure balls-to-the-wall mayhem for 59 seconds, with no more than half a second to catch your breath at any given point and no dead spots. Dead spots are an interesting thing on roller coasters. Most of the time I've seen them referred to in the case of elements that just didn't deliver. But I like to take the term one step further. To me, it means, at any given moment during a layout, is something happening? It doesn't have to be in terms of forces, a lot of the time it's just a feeling of pure fun. But something that I've felt is that on almost all coasters there will be points on the ride where I'm thinking. That's the best way I can describe it. I'm thinking, oh boy, here's an overbank, I can't wait for the Mosasaurus roll, or we're about to fly through the station. I do not like to think on roller coasters. But when I'm on Taiga, I still remember this feeling because it's just stuck with me. I feel like I'm free. I feel like I'm 7 years old again, riding Expedition Everest for the first time, filled with awe. Other coasters have given me that sensation of pure bliss, of course, that's why I love riding them so much and even made a YouTube channel to prattle on about them. But more than any other coaster, the feeling while I got on Taiga, speeding through the darkness at, to be fair, cartoonishly high speeds for the scale of the elements it traverses, it's just perfect. But what about some criticisms or things that Taiga doesn't do well? Let's see, it's not as well themed as it could be. It's still got pretty good theming though. It doesn't have an element that completely blew me away. It's got a ton of fantastic ones, but nothing like Velocicoaster's Mosasaurus roll, or Time Traveler's Drop Out of the Station, or Dragon Con's Zero-G roll. But I think that's more of a testament to what Taiga's really about than a detriment to the overall experience. Like I was just saying, each millisecond of this ride is special because you're always getting something out of it. On those other rides I mentioned, they have the wonderful elements, but it's the space in between that's not utilized as well, if that makes sense. A lot of roller coasters are about the parts, the specific elements, but Taiga's about the whole and how everything fits together to form a masterpiece of a coaster. In short, Taiga is perfect. It's got everything I could possibly want in a ride, and at least so far is my favorite roller coaster I've ever ridden. It's a special coaster to me, not for nostalgia purposes or any reason other than it's just that good. From the sheer intensity to the airtime and pacing and whip and everything else I talked about in this video, Taiga truly is a masterpiece. very small park in Finland to have a ride of this magnitude and greatness is very strange, but I'm all for it. And between this and all of the other amazing coasters Intamin's been building recently, as well as other elite manufacturers bringing in some of their best work, the future of the roller coaster industry is certainly very bright. Yet while others might prefer different modern creations like Steel Vengeance, Velocicoaster, or Iron Gwazi, Taiga holds a definite advantage over everything else I've been on. So with all of its incredible qualities and practically no faults, at least in my eyes, Tyga is perfect. Once again, thanks so much for watching to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and drop a like. If you didn't like it, maybe leave some constructive criticism in the comments. I'm always looking for ways to improve. If you've ridden Tyga, let me know your thoughts about your experience with it. Oh yeah, I also have a Discord server now. If you want to join that, the link is in the description. And as always, if you'd like to see more videos, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned to the channel for more coaster content. Goodbye.